if you have the option, can you switch to speaker view in your Zoom software? So you have a button on the top right. If you switch to speaker view, you'll get the most out of this session. You'll be able to fully see any slides or infographics and see who's talking. That's speaker view. Second, everyone is currently muted apart from myself and the panelists. Webcams have been automatically turned off. We are going to have a series of smaller group discussions straight after this session where you will be unmuted and you can put your webcams back on if you wish. Now, this is your chance to share your experiences and learn from your peers in a smaller setting. I'm very much looking forward to hearing you reflect on what's said today, so please do stay for the extra 30 minutes if you can. There's a lot of value in the group chats that are going to follow this more formal Q&A. Also, there's a chat box, should be on the right-hand side for those of you on PC or Mac. Feel free to type hello, let me know that it's working, let me know that you're out there. Questions and comments in this box are encouraged. If you want to ask a question via the microphone, you have a raise hand button at the bottom. I will see that. If there's time, I will unmute you and invite you to speak. So 2 o'clock now, we're going to chat in this format until around 2:50. Then we're going to have half an hour of breakouts. So our discussion today is outpatient models post-COVID. Outpatient activity in sectors like dentistry, fertility, ophthalmology, and cosmetic surgery all but came to a standstill as the COVID crisis tightened its grip. Can we have the doc planner slide up, please? So this little slide from April shows doc planners' experience of a drop in outpatient bookings. They're an online booking platform, obviously. So here are the questions. How are these sectors recovering? What does the market look like? Is there any silver lining going forward? This session will tell you what you need to know to run your business better, where to invest as we all adapt to the new normal. And if we can move the slide now, please. So I'm delighted to say we have an expert panel for you today who I'm going to invite to introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So starting with Thomas, Richard, Martin, then Ben, please.
Yes, so Thomas Sobel, I'm currently building up a home care nursing chain in Germany. But previously to this, I was building up and running Colosseum Dentals, which was a European dentistry chain at that point of time, active in 7 countries in Europe, with in the end 400 million euro in sales and 250 units.
Thank you, David. I'm Richard Banks. I'm the Group Chief Strategy Officer for Verdus Health. We are a fertility services provider listed on the ASX and present across Australia, Singapore, Ireland, the UK, and Denmark. So I'm in charge of coordinating and helping the chief executive build strategy for the group. And I also have another part of my role, and I'm the European director as well. So I'm in charge of all the European operations within the group as well.
Martin.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Buncho. I'm actually heading Smile Eyes, which is a privately owned ophthalmology service provider headquartered in Munich, Germany. Where we have 14 locations, and we also run our clinics in Trier and Luxembourg. So the full ophthalmology service spectrum, basically. The DNA of the company is based on refractive, so very much service and patient driven. Smile Eyes is also one of the leading brands in the refractive premium market in Germany. We have a Smile Eyes franchise with 10 Smile Eyes clinics in Germany, as well as operations in Austria and Russia. So thanks for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
And Ben.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Fairclough. I lead the healthcare and life science team for LEK Consulting in Europe. And we work with a range of clients in different clinic settings across all of Western Europe and globally. Areas that I cover in particular include, among others, dentistry, fertility, diagnostic imaging, and a range of other outpatient settings on the continent.
Thank you, everyone. That's our panel. I am David Farbrother, your moderator today. I'm the editor here at HBI. So on to the first question, and let's start with M&A. Now, from a news desk perspective, things have seemed quieter on the M&A front. We've seen a few deals, but some have been on hold, clearly. Things like GenSmile, UK Dentistry, Charm Capital were interested there. Bupa, we know, let go of some of its M&A and integration team members. So my first question is, how is the market? How are multiples? Has anything changed? Ben, I guess you're ideally placed to have a crack of this first. What's your feeling?
Yeah, I think clearly the whole experience of the pandemic has been very difficult on a whole range of dimensions, most notably the human, obviously. The business dimension, the M&A dimension has suffered just because of the nature of that kind of activity and the focus, of course, that market participants in healthcare services have had on dealing with the pandemic in many cases. Obviously, it's been a difficult time. Having said that, I think as we come out, there are some signs of how certain things have changed. And a lot of people often comment they think that this experience has accelerated pre-existing trends. And I think in some dimensions that's true. One of the trends that we've been observing in a range of outpatient settings across Europe is gradual greater willingness on behalf of some of the older practitioners in particular to seek to exit to corporate networks. And we think that that is likely to accelerate somewhat coming out of this experience, because a number of people who perhaps are in the last years of their career who were maybe thinking of carrying on for 2 years before the next thing are saying, well, actually, you know what, this is, I've had a bit of time to reflect, maybe my clinic's been closed for regulatory and safety reasons, and actually now is a time to bring forward my retirement plan to get on with it. So we think there could be something of an increase in supply, and there certainly remains interest on the demand side among groups that typically, with backing for private equity, remain really quite interested in developing both national and increasingly international regional networks. So I think some emerging causes for positivity in terms of that particular trend starting to accelerate slightly.
A quick supplemental question though. If I'm a Bergman or an Artemis, say, I'm going to want to hoover up any smaller operators now, am I not, before I sell? If I'm a company looking to sell, there are opportunities, roll-up opportunities now. Is it more likely we'll see some smaller deals with a view to building up a larger entity for sale, or not?
I think it's possible. I think obviously the corporate networks tend to still have the M&A capability that they had going into the crisis. In some cases, as you alluded to, that's maybe been reduced somewhat, but they do still definitely have the capability. So I think their willingness and ability to move relatively quickly in some cases remains absolutely intact. So I think on the margin, that's probably right. Equally, I think it's quite plausible that a lot of vendors are essentially they're trying to monetize their life's work. So they may not necessarily want to be rushed into that, I think.
Of course. Just a reminder to everyone to select Speaker View if you haven't done so already, by the way. Speaker View, top right. Richard, you're our fertility expert on the panel. Thoughts on M&A, on roll-up opportunities? What are you seeing in fertility?
Well, I think the obvious thing is, you know, as Ben's alluding to there, there'll be those individuals are looking to perhaps come out of their business in the wake of the pandemic, but also, I guess, you know, the logical place to be is that where you've got financially distressed organizations, they may be hoovered up by larger providers. But I think it's worth looking at things through a slightly different lens when it comes to M&A roll-up. And what I'm alluding to there is the fact that I anticipate more of our services moving into the virtual space. And you know, we're having this conference today in the virtual space, and increasingly I think we're going to see an acceleration towards delivering more services in the virtual space. And the question you've got to ask yourself there is, what's the relevance of bricks and mortar? Does it have less of a relevance? And actually, do we start to see roll-ups of a very, very different dimension, whereby you're able to project your services virtually into other geographies and other regions differently? And what does that mean for the roll-up? I don't fully know, but I think that might be a dynamic that comes into play.
Sure. And we'll move on maybe to talk about that if we have time, but things like remote testing, remote diagnosis, all of this plays into the same starting position which we have of a new model post-COVID, being more distant, more separate. What can you do without physically seeing the patient, I guess? Martin, same question for Optha. How are you seeing the Optha market over there?
Well, I think I have to same view as Ben, actually. If you look to the ophthalmology sector, there are a lot of people, the current owners who are in their late 50s, within their 60s, And some of them even fit with a COVID risk profile. So for them is a certain rationale for joining a larger group or selling their business. So effectively what we see now is that the whole COVID is probably even working as a catalyst to actually accelerate the consolidation process. And we know that some of the larger platforms are quite active in the market to do some add-on acquisitions. Actually, we also did just 2 smaller transactions during COVID, actually, and that's another point that when the decision is taken by the owners now, I think that the speed of closing the transaction is getting faster than before. So I think that the consolidation will be faster, or the process will be faster now post-COVID.
You said during COVID. Was that during COVID and because of COVID, or just
a mix? I think one thing was basically because of COVID, because people have been uncertain. Uncertainty obviously means that they're trying to see a safe harbor, and they basically want just a safe harbor and working with us, and that's something we can offer them.
Sure. And any view on multiples? Are you, since you've been active in the market, are you looking at multiples as being slightly lower than you would have expected?
I haven't seen any larger transaction yet. I think that will be the litmus test for the industry. So when a larger transaction comes out, I think the last one I saw was the Spa Medica,
yes.
The transaction in the UK, but this was more on pre-COVID terms.
Yes.
On the smaller transaction, I don't see actually that the multiples are going down, and my personal view is that multiples are not going down anyway, because the ophthalmology sector has been rather mild affected by COVID compared to other sectors, and so I think there's still a lot of money out there. And if I look to our numbers, we are basically quite nicely moving up compared to last year. So I think it's an interesting sector to invest there. But as I said, I mean, there hasn't been any larger transaction post-COVID, so this will be an interesting thing to see how the market directs then.
And you mentioned Spa Medica there. I don't think the money has actually changed hands yet. I know it's a done deal.
Oh, okay.
But, we watch these things. We have a little pipeline, and we try to see when the deal is actually finished, and that's one that's been sitting there for a while. Thomas, your background is in dental. I know that it's not your business focus at the moment, but we're obviously particularly interested in outpatient today. I have seen some suggestions, for example, that multiples could fall. One London dentist tells me that for an M25 practice, he might have been paying 8 to 9 times. He might be looking at 7.5 times EBITDA to pay. Do you have any sense generally that prices are changing? What's your assessment of the situation, Thomas?
Maybe from the dentistry perspective, I mean, there were a couple of larger transactions which were about to happen early this year, and I know they've all been delayed.
Yes, indeed.
So I think on the larger change, it'd be quite hard to get a fast meeting between price expectations of sellers, and which I know haven't changed that much, and what sellers are prepared to pay and get done right now. So on the smaller deals, I would agree of what have been said here. I think there would be a number of people who accepted wants to sell at this point of time, and are probably expecting a somewhat lower price. Exactly how much is hard to say on average. But I would agree to that statement that it's likely to be some sellers wanting to sell at the lower price right now. I can say what I'm doing today, but we're also very active. We bought 11 companies last year. We have the intention of doing the same right now. We have basically, the problem is we couldn't get any meetings, right? That was you cannot buy a company without physical meetings, and that just didn't take place during the second quarter this year. We have a very strong pipeline right now. We're about to conclude 4 deals in the coming 4 weeks, I think. Also larger size, and where the prices are for those deals now, it's home care, so it's slightly different, but the prices are slightly lower than before.
So the suggestion being that we might have a slew of deals where people can be face to face in the coming months when COVID is less of an issue. We might suddenly see a little bit more of an avalanche.
I mean, for care, it's maybe slightly easier because we haven't had much drop in performance at all, if any. We have close to zero performance change.
Sure.
If the performance will go down, it's a bit tougher call for how long will this last, and how will profits hold up for the next couple of years. And that probably should be a fair value adjustment because of the state the business is in. And we saw your numbers before that, but of course, all these companies have been severely hit.
Yeah.
So I think that is a bit more challenging now in my area right now, but I think at least in our case, we saw a strong interest, and I think other people in the panels list matches to that perspective. There clearly are people wanting to get out of the business. And if a buyer is prepared to take some risk of how the recovery works, there should be this to be done.
Okay, that's very interesting. We're all aware of the shift to digital remote consultations, the need for more PPE and social distancing measures. So let's have a poll, a bit of audience participation. You can't just sit back and watch the screen. Let's see what you think. This is our first poll of the afternoon. Who will benefit most from the new normal in healthcare services? So we're thinking about PPE, we're thinking about remote consultations, digital shift, and just have a vote on that, everyone. We'll see that coming up. And as the votes are coming in on there, let's go spinning off that and talk about what a good post-COVID outpatient clinic looks like. We know about remote testing and diagnosis. Richard, you touched on whether or not you needed a building. There can be changes to how patients access services. Martin, perhaps we can start with you. Has anything changed for you in this post-COVID environment? Are people shopping around more or less? How is your approach different to how it was?
Well, I guess you mentioned already the main constraints for us is the number of people you have in the clinic. You have social distancing, you have hygiene concepts, and a lot more which you have to take into account there. And I don't think this is going away soon. So this is something which will be the new normal for us for quite some while. So if you really want to go to pre-COVID patient numbers, I think you really need to look on your operational excellence. So review your processes. For me, one of the key KPIs for this is the time patient is in the clinic. So most clinics have excellent processes in the OR, but not outside of the OR. So how can you minimize the patient time, but he still needs to feel to be treated special there. And that's something we have been looking in quite significantly to really improve all the processes for us. And also, I mean, we probably will still have to have our bricks and mortar clinic, but also looking into questions. So what is really necessary to perform within the clinic? So starting with video calls for just testing this, and just looking, for example, what kind of registration processes can you basically perform before you come into the clinic? So we just initiated a project with a patient app, looking into how we can deal. I mean, one of my guys just came up with, why don't we do a fast lane check-in for patients with a patient app? So they don't already have done some of their figures, but there's something just we initiate basically. But you shouldn't ask your doctors, because when I asked my doctors, they obviously told me they have to have the patient in the clinic physically. There's nothing which can be performed outside, but that's basically something we are looking at. But the key metrics for me is really how to minimize the time the patient is in the clinic.
Yeah, I was talking to a cosmetic surgeon, and he said the only time he needs to see the patient is when he's operating on them, or to get permission. And to get permission, I guess, is a fairly important thing as well. But I can understand that. You do online briefings as well. I think you've just started up giving initial online briefings for the services you offer as well. Is that right?
We tested it, yes, and different outcomes in different clinics, but then something we tested. And also in the refractive service, you have some information evenings. So there's something we obviously can easily do online, and you actually have a broader audience and much more targeted audience then as well. So there are some parts which you can do, but in a sense, a lot of things still have to be physically in the clinic.
And you talked about a return to pre-COVID levels. Do you have any sense about when things will be back to normal, at least as far as figures are concerned? I'm guessing that issues relating to hygiene and separation and cleanliness have all played their part. And even if people were able to come in normally, there are new standards that you've got to hit.
Yeah, but it really depends what kind of segments you look at. And I mean, even during COVID at the beginning, the younger generation didn't really care, so they're still coming into a clinic. So, when we had the lockdown, or the lockdown was basically abandoned, we basically did shift our marketing during the COVID, and we had a nice ramp up straight after COVID. So in terms of the Surgeries we performed, we're basically already above last year levels.
Fantastic. Richard, fertility. What's a good outpatient clinic in the current climate?
I mean, I think every specialty is going to be a little bit different, but in the fertility context, I think we were already seeing more of what we do moving into the virtual space and into the online space, David. In fact, throughout COVID, we continued to operate on a consultation basis, and the demand was very high for that. And what I'd say is our clinicians adapted to that very, very quickly indeed. And that looks like it's going to be sustained into the future, I'd say. So I think for fertility, what does a good outpatient clinic look like? It's going to be more consultation in the remote space. I think more remote monitoring, more remote testing. And I think, to be honest with you, if you're going to design a fertility clinic now from scratch, you have to ask yourself what it would probably look like. And I think the footprint will be quite different. Perhaps less outpatient facing in terms of bricks and mortar, and your patient only really making contact with the bricks and mortar when they come for their egg collection and their embryo transfer, really ideally. Now, most companies, well, all companies probably aren't in that space yet, but I predict that they'll get there over the coming years as we adapt to a new normal.
Does that make it harder to build that key relationship with the patient? Because presumably the more you see them, you can impress them with your slick offices and, with your receptions, and you get a chance to sell to them in that context. If you're doing things more remotely, that makes it more difficult to build up that relationship, or are there other ways?
I think it's changing, David. I mean, what we've seen, I mean, traditionally, we would have held patient evenings where patients would have come into the clinic and seen the facility and had a look around. We've moved those into the virtual space, and that's been tremendously popular, and the numbers are high actually as well. And I think in terms of accessibility, I think patients are going to be looking more and more at the quality of their virtual experience, and we're seeing more apps come into the space now. We're utilizing some of those in terms of how patients access their services as well. That's more convenient, it's more efficient, and there's both there's a win-win from that, from an experience perspective, a patient experience perspective, a patient convenience perspective, but also it makes things more efficient as well and releases resources in your clinic so that your people can concentrate on other things elsewhere. Sure. So I think I predict that there'll be a shift towards that, and that's probably what a good outpatient clinic in the fertility sector will probably look like going forward.
Ben, anything to add to that? Are the targets that people are looking for changing? Is there any kind of shift in the waters?
Well, can I get to your first question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Richard was saying, so I think this topic of communication is really important. I mean, fundamentally, as in a lot of life, healthcare is built on trust, and you do have to create that trust to underpin the relationship through some mechanism. And I think your point's a good one, which is if you're not having as much physical face-to-face contact, you've sure as heck got to overcompensate, I think, in the other dimensions. And again, looking at some of the lessons learned from how people have responded in the pandemic, we've seen some operators really focusing very heavily on both clinician and patient communication. That could be operators where capacity has been reduced during the pandemic, so they've been explaining how that's going to work on both fronts. It could be where they've been closed completely, and they've worked very hard to communicate to those two key stakeholder groups, their clinicians and their patients, about what it is they are doing to keep the capacity in place, what are they doing to prepare for reopening, what are they doing to manage infection control risk, how are they providing some of the kind of services and technologies, or looking to provide them, that we've been talking about, to create more remote versions or digital versions of engagement. So I think this concept of really focusing on how you engage with patients, how you build trust with patients, and how you do that actually with clinicians if you're running a network. And this theme, I love the phrase that Martin used of safe harbor. I think there's a growing realization in some segments, in some countries, because of the way the pandemic has played out for some clinicians, that actually corporate networks, rather than being perhaps rather faceless entities that don't give you the freedom to operate, which would be the sort of negative caricature of old, actually can provide precisely what Martin said, a safe harbor for you to focus on delivering care, than anything else. So I think there are some really interesting themes linked to trust, linked to communication, and that does, to some extent, take you to digital, but not exclusively. It also just takes you to around those topics, which we're really encouraging people to adopt. The only other point I'd make is I think it's also been quite an interesting time to reflect on portfolio reconfiguration. And we've talked about the switch from physical to digital, and Richard, I think, said some interesting things on that. It's also perhaps an opportunity just to look at your portfolio and say, well, does it make sense to have all of these nodes that we've got? Maybe some can group together, maybe we just don't need all of them laid out in quite the same way. So it is a pretty much unique opportunity, certainly for those people who've really had to run their capacity down, to take that step back and say, well, actually, as we start to come back up again, do we want to come back in the same way, even with all the same nodes and how we configure?
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Should we just flash up the poll results briefly and see how that's gone? Patient will benefit. I don't think anyone is too surprised by that. Is anyone on the panel surprised by that? Raise a hand if that's a shock to anybody. I suspected not. Okay, we might come on back to that. Okay, well, the answers that you've given there, and you were alluding to it, Ben, probably move us towards digital and considering how quickly we're moving towards a digital offering. Ben, I think LEK had a slide on this that we can look at. Can we get the LEK slide up, please? Just have a very quick look. I think the headline on this, telemedicine arrives in the UK, 10 years change in 1 week, is a dramatic headline. I quite like that. I think, Ben, that's probably quite self-evident as to what that stands for. Was there anything that you wanted to add to this?
No, I think it was, as you say, David, it was just to highlight something that we've all, I think, observed, that this really is a trend that was rapidly accelerated in some markets, in fact, most markets, particularly here in the UK, where we hadn't been particularly promoting telemedicine through any fundamental change in reimbursement, unlike in France and Germany. So you can see it starting to come through in those last two bars on the right as the orange segments become so much bigger relative to the blue.
Absolutely, and we can take the slide down now. Thank you. I guess the question then that comes off that is, as we move more towards a digital world, if your value proposition has changed, if your service offering has changed, then does that affect your marketing? Richard, I think you particularly have some thoughts on this, don't you?
Yeah, I think it could mean different things to different organizations. What I think will be relevant as we're talking about digital is how synonymous is your company's brand with technology. So we all know, for example, Babylon Health are a brand that is synonymous with technology, but other healthcare operator brands may not be. And for those brands that aren't and are looking to move into that space, I think there are a number of ways that they may try to do that. They may try to align themselves with known technology brands. So perhaps that's with Apple or with Google or whoever, to try and shift themselves into that space. Or they may even set up their own brands or their own sub brands, like BMW did with BMW iDrive. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the automotive sector in this, with the shift towards electric cars and how that's changed branding as well. There are lessons learned from other sectors in here. So yeah, I think branding will need to be synonymous with technology, and that will require some repositioning for organizations. And I actually think that may be a hallmark to some extent, and driven by demand from the patient, as the virtual experience or the patient experience in the digital realm really becomes a kite mark of quality or an indicator of quality as well. So I think brand repositioning and aligning with technology will be quite important for organizations in the future.
So possibly survival of the slickest or the best teched company, or at least the one that presents in that way to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. Or even the coolest, if you like. How
is that going to affect big, clunky bricks and mortar behemoths? I'm not going to name any, but if you're a big operator, a big hospital operator looking at moving more into outpatients, and you've got that traditional big bricks and mortar background, is that going to hamper you in any way, you think? Or,
gosh, I mean, That's a tough one, David. I think there are many different strategies that you could apply to approach that. As I said, you could, align yourself with a partner to try and bring some of that technological gloss, if you like, to your own brand. The fact that you're working in an alliance with a partner like that, or you could try and reposition yourself as well, or change your brand or come up with a sub brand. I think for those types of brands, those types of companies and organizations, it will be tricky for them.
Sure.
I think because you'll get these you'll get a lot of startup brands probably doing quite well, such as Babylon.
Yeah.
You can disrupt the space and take charge of the narrative to some extent as well.
Although you can be high profile and making no money in that sphere at the moment, I guess, without naming any names. That's interesting as well. You wonder when they're going to see a return. They generally, not any specific company, on their investments. Thomas, do you have any thoughts on branding at all in this new environment? Is there a new sell? I guess safety is super important these days. That ties in with quality, of course, but I guess safety is
I think it's more my sort of dentistry experience before, but I'm a bit struggling to see the big prospects of changing the business model. It's quite tough, and what I'm doing today, again, it's really impacted, but not impacting. It's more an internal impact on everything we do. How we run things internally to take care of patients in the best way. This has had profound impacts of our internal processes, but not the customer-facing processes.
Sure. I guess dentistry, like ophthalmology, Martin, you've got to see the patients. They've got to come in, haven't they?
Exactly. But I mean, branding is a big thing still, and I like the idea to be a cool brand. You can link this to technology. So interesting idea. And but for us, it's not like the value proposition is changing, but trust, safety, reputation is something which, in particular during COVID, is increasing. So brand is something which definitely is increasingly important also in the ophthalmology. And if you look to how the patient intake flow is in ophthalmology, in refractive, you have the classic B2C marketing like online, social media, and so forth. But in the more medical side, like cataract, you have typically an ophthalmologist who indicates cataracts and refers the patient to a clinic. I think what we might see there is that sort of retailing effect where branding and the whole experience, how you build the brand, the virtual room, probably have to take the example what Richard just said. So that people doesn't want to be told where to go anymore. So they're more like going shopping and trying to see what kind of clinic it is and how the reputation and the brand is.
But I think if you think of how you saw it from dentistry before, I think you will have an accelerating trend that with strong brands who are doing it the right way will benefit from this, even if overall maybe it's negative. Their market share should benefit clearly from this, because you need a certain scale to make that payoff investment. Yeah. So it will benefit the larger players who sort of can take an opportunity here and gain from this.
Martin, something you and I talked about briefly last week. Are people shopping around more than they used to? And what's your take-up rate once you've got a potential patient engaged? Is there any change in whether they go through to the next stage?
Well, during COVID, our experience was that once you had the patient in the clinic, the shopping around was much less. So the conversion rate to the patient then actually do the surgery was much higher than before. So the shopping to go to 4 or 5 other clinics is basically less attractive for them because they don't want to go around during this time. So it will be interesting to see how it's going on further. But this was our experience during COVID.
Excellent. I want to move in now to something that ties in with all of this, which is quality. How do you measure it? Is there a revenue benefit? How much does objectively proven quality raise your price? Does it raise your price? And also, are you comparing yourself to your peers? Is quality about empirical data? Is it about the quality of the patient experience, particularly with a new focus on safety? What is quality? Why does it matter? Do you get paid for it? Martin, we've just kind of segued into this. I'll let you address this first, and then I'll come to everybody else.
Well, quite frankly, quality, I think, is a difficult one for me. I mean, obviously, you have the medical outcome, but this is something which is difficult for the patient to really to assess what kind of medical outcome it was. So you can have a patient with a perfect medical outcome, but he's complaining. On the contrast, you can have a patient who did not have the perfect medical outcome, but he can be a very happy patient. And
So which is better, a fit patient or a happy patient?
Well, for me, it's the happy patient. Therefore, it's the whole experience, basically what the patients have, and again starts where the first touch point with the clinic is, which is the call center or the website, and it's the way how the staff is communicating and manage expectations. And ideally, I want to have the same experience, the same Smilex experience for every person. And the best way is that I have a happy patient who goes out and refers family and friends to our clinic. So for me, it's more the process and the patient satisfaction, I would call it, rather than quality.
Sure.
So the patient satisfaction is a better indicator for me than just quality.
And if you can establish quality empirically, independently, does that give you any effect on your top line? I mean, do you get more money for it?
In ophthalmology, I wouldn't say we get more money for it. I mean, we are in the premium segment, so
Sure.
for us, it would be a given to have the highest quality in terms of medical outcome. But again, if the whole experience, the patient experience has to be right, because that's what the patient is that's paying for. And we have such a...
we're back to the patient experience.
Yeah.
Ben, are people shopping around looking for quality? And if they're looking for quality, how are they defining it?
I think they're definitely accessing online information increasingly, whether it's online reviews, so it's more qualitative and experiential, or in some cases looking for more quantitative evidence, but often that's clearly quite hard to interpret for the layman. So I think traditional sources, guides to quality or perceived guides to quality, like recommendations, they still remain very important. But the evidence suggests that people are looking at reviews.
Sure. So rating sites do matter to a degree, do they?
Well, they are gaining attention, yeah. And I think, again, operators that have the capacity to do so are spending more time making sure they're encouraging patients to put their comments online. They're making sure they reply to negative comments. All the kind of things you learn from the hospitality industry, really, are gradually finding their way into bits of healthcare. It's early days, though, for obvious reasons. So I think you've got to focus on both. I mean, you have to focus on clinical quality because you have to focus on clinical quality. And again, the direction of travel seems pretty clear. There's going to be more measurement. There's going to be more transparency. And you can either get ahead of that curve, or you can wait for it to be imposed on you by regulation and pressure. So I don't think there's many places we look where we see people doing anything other than trying to be on the front foot on that front and trying to be on the front foot on the patient experience front as well. But I think the patient experience side is very important. I would agree with earlier comments. And quality, of course, in that sense, it has different levels. Something we haven't really talked about is that I think we all reasonably now expect a pretty difficult economic period for the next set of quarters. And that suggests there will be opportunities, indeed necessity in many cases, to start to differentiate offers, serving different types of patient. So you'll have groups of patients who will remain able and willing to pay out of pocket for high-end quality, and they need a certain kind of patient experience to be delivered. You'll probably have another group who's looking for more a value-based offer. Clinical quality obviously has to be there, but in terms of the rest of the experience, it can be really pared back. They're not interested. They don't need it. They don't want it, and they're not going to pay for it. So measuring the quality of that experience is important again, but different.
Okay, interesting. It's different in fertility, I guess, Richard, because you can have very definite guides depending on the country as to what success is, whether it's a chemical pregnancy, whether it goes to full term. So there is empirical data available where similar guidelines have been adopted by countries. I know some countries, the guidelines are a lot looser. and also, I guess there's an element of different rules about what you can and can't do, which would have an effect. But what's your view on quality generally in the fertility context?
I think there are three domains, if you like, David, to this. There's, as we've all discussed, the quality, and I should probably say the safety of care as well, will remain central for all services, I'm sure, but especially I think in fertility, and as you say, it's all about the outcome in fertility. People come to a fertility clinic to get pregnant, to have a healthy child. I think the quality of experience has already been alluded to as well. So that's the second domain. I think is very, very relevant. But in a more virtual setting, as we've discussed, in a more digital setting, I think the quality and safety around people's information as well becomes more and more relevant. And that will be another, if you like, I see that as information security as a KPI in the future for many clinics, and it's probably something that we should build into our KPI suites as well. Yeah, I mean the user experience, I think, is going to be very interesting as we move more into the digital space. I think, you know, the user experience around convenience and accessibility we've already spoken about, and the traditional way of collecting information on that obviously used to run patient surveys and questionnaires to try and gather the information. But what I'm going to suggest is we could flip that on its head. Actually, if you've got more consultations happening in the virtual space, that new technologies like natural language processing can actually evaluate consultations and give an indication of how the patient is feeling. You know, this technology is out there and it's being developed, and that may feed into the overall quality experience, you know, the outputs of that. And that might be, you know, it may detect that this doctor doesn't, for example, help their patients relax, or this point in the process here makes patients feel stressed. It's a highly emotive journey in the fertility sector. So new technology and flipping that around actually may enrich how we measure quality as well as how we deliver it as well.
You mentioned individual doctors. Does the reputation of an individual doctor within your field, maybe it's the case in ophthalmology at the top end as well, perhaps, Martin, but does the reputation of individual specialists in the top tier, how much does that matter? Their reputation for quality, their results, perhaps?
Hugely so.
Right.
Hugely so, David. Not just about their results, but about, I would say, you know, their personality actually, and to use an old-fashioned term, their bedside manner and how they engage with their patients as well. Their personality is a huge component of that, as well as their results and their outcomes. But yes, they for the fertility sector, they're hugely relevant.
And do your star performers get tutelage on their people skills? They may not need it.
Yeah, you can try, I guess. They probably don't need it, you know. But I mean, data from NLP and from consultations may enrich that. You know, their clinicians are people, are professionals who respond to data, and you know, that may enrich and their own experience, and also help them look at their own performance in new ways as well.
Sure. Martin, is that the same for you with your top performers?
Absolutely the same. Yeah, absolutely the same, and for us here, so it's very huge important. And we actually have specific trainings also in terms of how you engage with the patient. So it's a very important topic for us.
And obviously retaining staff of that caliber is massively important as well, to pay and incentivize appropriately. And those who will become those in the future, I guess, as well. Interesting. Thomas, any thoughts on quality, spinning off the discussion that we've just had there?
Yes, at least from what I can see is that patient will care, believing that you are taken care of appropriately in this kind of time. So, and if you would not be a sort of a proper operation, I think patient will be much more concerned about going to you. I mean, you can see in dentistry, some people changed processes, stopped using certain tools because they were not hygienic.
Sure.
You clearly see operational effects, and others may not have been as firm and consistent in applying the procedures. But you see that data statistic, you know, I'm not sure how fast patients are in reacting and realizing what we may be seeing. It clearly has some importance.
Yes, and the regulations as far as operators are concerned, and again, touching on dentistry, for stuff like AGP, for aerosol generating procedures. So spit and saliva, when you're drilling and filling, the concerns about that and the safety, not just of the patients in that environment, but of the practitioners as well, has been a key fundamental part of the discussions that have taken part with the professionals and the professional bodies. And that ties in with quality, because if nothing else, people want to feel safe when they're going into this environment. And I'm guessing getting that message of safety across for all of the operators here is absolutely key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Interesting. Let's have a quick second poll. Make sure the audience is still out there. How much does objectively proven quality raise your price? This is one really aimed at the operators, and I'm aware that we've got a disparate bunch here from different subsectors, but I would be interested to see, does quality matter? And quality here, I'm talking about objectively proven quality. So not the patient experience, which may be, as we've heard, all important and relates to quality, but objective quality. Okay. So it's making a difference just on the initial results there. Just watching them come in. It's like watching the BBC election forecasts. But it does make a difference more often than not. And that is pleasing. That should be pleasing, I think, to all of us. As we head towards the end of this part of the session, let's have a very quick response on the shift to digital. So can I just have 30 seconds, 1 minute each, on what your business is doing to shift closer to digital? What are you practically doing? Richard, could you give me 45 seconds, 1 minute on what you're doing, shift to digital?
Yeah, so we've shifted more to digital during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the crisis, and we've done that during country lockdowns as well. I think our shift to digital will be looking at what we have done, not only sustaining that, but seeing how far we can possibly take it and what does that do to our business model going forward.
Great answer. Thomas?
I'd rather drop to the other ones as I'm not actively running.
You're no longer doing your dentistry, are you? Martin, practically speaking, what changes have you made in the shift to digital in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, as I pointed out, the limited opportunities for us, but we tried on video calls and the digital information evenings. So that's something we're basically pushing further. We have 2 new projects up and running with industry. One is around the patient, and the other one is more on the medical side, where we have some digital projects coming up. We also did push a lot of our staff in home office, so the administration side, the call center, for example, and that's something which worked quite well. So that's something we are basically looking into, what kind of functions can we move into home office. That's still something going on. But in terms of the business model, there are limitations in ophthalmology, I would say. Okay.
And you may have addressed this, but we've had a question from the audience, and I don't want to ignore it. Quick yes or no, I'm afraid, given the time. Can quality be charged to institutional payers? Martin, sorry. Or anyone that has a view on that.
Sorry, I'll give an
10-second answer.
My answer would be, I think one of the big benefits of quality is in winning and retaining work for institutional payers.
Yeah. Excellent. Anybody else have a view on that as we come to a close?
I would say yes, if it improves outcomes.
Lovely. Okay, it's just on 2:50 according to my clock. So that concludes our Q&A session with our panelists. And we are moving into the last half hour of this event, which is the round table discussions. I'd like to thank the panel for their fascinating insights. Richard, Ben, Martin, Thomas, thank you so much. Your time is very much appreciated. It's difficult getting 4 people together in the same room to talk about the same subject, and it's moving your diaries is really sincerely appreciated. So thank you for that. To everybody watching, sit tight. You're going to be moved in a moment into a smaller separate room. There will be an HBI moderator in every room. And as I said at the top, this is your chance to share your experiences and, more importantly, to learn from your peers. Once you've moved rooms, you might want to start your webcams. There's no need for that, but it might be nice for us all to see each other. And we'll be moving across shortly. The best way to view this next session is in gallery view, not speaker view. So if you did as I asked and you switched to speaker view at the start, flip across to gallery view, and I'll see some of you shortly, and there will be a moderator in every room. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.